FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Today's show is brought to you by Blue Sky Uranium Corporation. Blue Sky has first mover advantage in Argentina in the world's newest uranium and vanadium district. With an existing near-surface deposit that's open for expansion, Blue Sky also controls a massive district-scale land package with mineralization along a 145-kilometer-long trend. Blue Sky possesses tremendous exploration upside and is an excellent leverage play on rising uranium and vanadium prices. The company is run by a best-in-class management and technical team with proven exploration and development success in Argentina. Blue Sky Uranium trades under the ticker symbol BSK on the Toronto Venture Exchange and as BKUCF on the OTC. For more information and to stay on top of the latest news, go to blueskyuranium.com. That's blueskyuranium.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 4/22/19. Hey, as always, be a part of the show and email us kl@kerrylutz.com with any questions or comments. Best part of my day, they're about to open a new subversive coffee shop right around the corner from my house. So I will be able to walk there. And while I'm walking there, I'll read your emails and have a good chuckle along the way. Well, hey, speaking of having a good laugh, it seems like comedy is infecting politics. Hard to believe, you think? Well, look at the Ukraine. They just elected a comedian, a retired comedian. Do comedians ever retire? I think he's like Christopher Steele, former spy Christopher Steele. We have former comedian now is going to run the Ukraine. But more important than that, let's get on with John Rubino and take a look at the latest COT report. You don't know what COT means? It means commitment of traders, and banks are required to make disclosures about their holdings of commodities. They're required to file it. I think it's monthly, but John will correct me on that. And you can glean a lot from what is going to happen to metals prices from that COT report, even now. John, so COT or bust?
Hey, Kerry. Well, yeah, it happened again with gold this year. We had the really nice January, February seasonal pop when all the Asians were buying gold to give to brides and grooms for wedding presents. And it peaked at 1340, 1350, which is this big resistance level that is held for the past 5 years now. Every time it gets up there, it gets smacked back down, and it happened again this time. So combine the normal seasonal fluctuation with a big swing in, as you said, the commitment of traders report. In other words, the structure of the futures market in gold, which is where a lot of speculators place their bets on gold, and a lot of the commercial traders place their bets in order to get gold shipped to them for fabrication. Early in this year, it was fairly favorable because speculators were very short, and they tend to be wrong at big turning points. So you had this really nice couple of indicators coming together. Seasonality was favorable. The commitment of traders report was favorable because the speculators were way too pessimistic, and it worked. Gold and silver went up for a while, but then both of those things shifted. Seasonality ended. Now we're back in the sell in May and go away period when Asian buying tends to dry up, and that usually leads to somewhat weaker prices. And at the same time, the futures market got very, very unfavorable. Speculators swung from being pessimistic to optimistic in a really short period of time. It just took them a couple of months to go extremely long. They got really pumped about the prospects for a big run in gold and silver, and that led the structure of the futures market to become unfavorable. And lo and behold, gold and silver have gone back down, just as usually happens. See, this time around, there was some hope that gold would pierce that resistance level and just keep on going because the fundamentals are so great. You have insane amounts of debt being taken on, yada, yada. All your listeners have heard this story before. But it didn't happen. Now, the nice thing about these cycles is that even when you're stuck in an unfavorable part of one, it's going to change in the future. And it's already looking like the Commitment of Traders report, at least, in other words, the structure of the futures market, is heading back to favorable. The last week had a huge shift in the commercials going less short and a little more long, and in the speculators going less long and dramatically more short. So one more week, like the last week, which ended on last Tuesday. So in other words, the trading that is going to go in the next report has already mostly happened. And it was pretty unfavorable for gold and silver, which means that probably the trend of the speculators getting pessimistic and the commercials getting optimistic continued. But if we have one more shift like we had last week in the report that comes out this coming Friday, then you could say that the Commitment of Traders report has shifted to positive. And that at least is indicating that a bottom is near for gold and silver, and another upswing is in the making for the next few months. So we'll see. But at least, that one indicator is starting to point in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Just when you thought it was safe to go outside, it's not, right?
Well, these cycles repeat and repeat and repeat. And for the past decade or so, or longer with seasonality, but at least for the past decade, for the COT report, you fight them at your peril because they have tended to work. And it's really tempting to think that fundamentals are going to swamp the technicals at some point, just because we're making the kinds of mistakes that have historically led to huge runs in precious metals and dramatic declines in the value of the currencies in the countries where the mistakes are being made. That fundamentals will just swamp these technical indicators, but hasn't happened yet. And if it's not going to happen anytime soon, then at least you've got the cycle. At least that when the speculators in the futures market get too pessimistic, that puts a floor under the price of gold and silver. And when the end of the year approaches, seasonality, that is the Asians' propensity to buy a lot of gold and silver at those times, that puts a tailwind behind the price of gold and silver. So we're heading back for that again. But the summer doldrums will, if seasonality still matters, be another few boring months before the action starts again.
Yeah, and the action will come back, right? It always does. And
Kerry, we've got to keep in mind that the longer term trend is still in place, which is that the currencies of the world are being debased at an accelerating rate, and real assets are going to rise in those currency terms. So you can look at what's happening now in precious metals as just another chance to buy some more cheaply. And if you think of it that way, if you continue to accumulate, then the down cycle that tends to happen in the summer and early fall is that's when you do your buying, So if you take a long view, this is okay. If you need money right away from your precious metals, it's really frustrating. So, I feel the pain of a lot of people out there who would like to cash out and spend what they've made in gold and silver on other things, and who don't feel like they can do it because the price isn't up enough yet. That'll come with patience.
Very, very true. It's it's just amazing the things that happen in life, in our lives. You just don't know where the future is going to unfold for sure. So it ain't over till it's over, till the fat lady is sung or whatever. Hey, we got a question here from our good friend and long-time listener, Jesse. Says, wishing us happy Easter. Question for John that baffles the fleece off of me. Since we survived Holy Week, how could the Atlanta Fed have begun the quarter so far off on their GDP estimates? Talk about resurrection from 0.2% to 2.8. I smell bovine blankety blank. And trust me, I step in it all the time. John, has the Atlanta Fed also become a lapdog for the political whims? Have a fantastic week. By the way, love the dual discussions. Maybe get both Powell and DiMartino Booth to discuss regulatory capture, LMAO. What I wouldn't give for that, Jesse. So what's your thought here, John?
Now the Atlanta Fed tends to see really wild swings in its predictions because it is taking in data in real time. When that data bounces around, their GDP projection for the quarter bounces around as well. Normally it goes the other way, though. Normally they start out higher than the average economist's prediction and then gradually trend downward till they're way below what most economists are predicting. This time it went the other way. They started low and have gone high. And part of that is because we had this hangover from the equities bear market that happened towards the end of last year. That spooked a lot of people, caused them to spend less money. That's called the wealth effect. When your stocks are up, you spend more money. When your stocks are down, you spend less. And that and a few other things led to some really weak economic numbers. Now, in response to the financial markets getting volatile towards the end of the year, all the central banks out there have shifted gears, and now they're easing again. And China, in particular, is generating massive amounts of new debt. And presumably that debt is, the money that's raised by borrowing is being spent on stuff. And that's giving an impetus to growth around the world. And so some of the numbers that have come out just lately have been okay. As stocks are up, which is an indicator of future economic growth generally. Retail sales in the U.S. was up 1.6% in the last report, which is a big jump, far exceeding what was expected. And manufacturing in general is starting to pick back up, including, believe it or not, car sales. So you take those numbers, put them into the Atlanta Fed's model, and you get higher GDP for the quarter. That might or might not stay, because we could have numbers come out next month that reverse out the increases that we saw in the March reports.
Easily.
It's easy. And one thing that's interesting now is we've got the stock market and the bond market saying different things, because stocks are up, which is a sign that people expect rising growth and rising corporate profits, but bond yields are down, which is an indicator that the fixed income market expects slowing growth, which implies lower corporate earnings and probably lower stock prices out there because they depend, at least to an extent, on corporate earnings. And so we don't know which of those two signals is true and which one is false, but they based on history, can't both be right because they're saying different things. So that's the thing to watch now. These GDP reports are data dependent, whereas the stock market and the bond market are predictive. In other words, they're telling you this is what we think is going to happen in the future. And they're saying different things right now. So those are the things to watch. Will bond yields keep falling, which would invert the yield curve even further? And that's a big recession indicator. And will stock prices keep going up? That indicates that that people who buy stocks and the companies that issue stocks are seeing positive things going on out there. So we'll see. One or the other will be proven right. And we'll know within a few months. Normally these kinds of divergences don't last that long.
Yeah, my guess is, it started off slow, partly because of the government shutdown, like you said, the hangover from the decline in the stock market the first quarter, and then all of a sudden, and the weather too. Let's not forget, the first quarter of the year, GDP-wise, is always adversely impacted by weather conditions around the country. We had all those Midwestern floods, a lot of bad weather, cold weather still coming from the Midwest, all these things. So I'm tend to believe it's not cooked, but then again, GDP is not the most accurate measure of wealth creation, of which we've been in a deficit of for a long, long time. And we're trying to get a guy from this YouTube channel, Blue Collar Economics, I think it's called. He just explains it all really well. Hey, so John, we've got this trend in politics where it looks like anybody who can crack a joke is all of a sudden a contender. Look, Al Franken, I couldn't stand him, but he was a comedian, and he was pretty good on Saturday Night Live before he became a complete ideological nutcase. Then we've got in the Ukraine, they just elected a comedian, a former comedian, which I think a former comedian, like I said before, it's like a former spy. You never really retire from being a comedian. We're really into comedy here too, John. We've got, if you ever look at the website, Financial Survival Network, well, my personal, I should say not website, it's my personal Facebook page at Kerry Lutz. We post a lot of these Florida man things, and because the headline is always Florida man this, Florida man that. Well, here's a great one, John, and I don't mean to interfere with our normal content, but we're talking about comedy here. Deputies, Florida man's homemade pipe bomb sells into neighbor's yard. All right. So, like, what are you doing with a homemade pipe bomb, fooling around with it? And how did it wind up in your neighbor's yard? So the guy this was in Volusia County. He had to post $10,000 bail. You'll find it on the Facebook page for me, Kerry Lutz. But you should take a look at Financial Survival Network's Facebook page as well. But John, comedy. So without comedy, life is boring, isn't it?
Well, politics is, the old saying is, politics is just showbiz for ugly people.
Yeah.
And, we are in a stage now of the kind of post-capitalist world that we live in, where nobody's happy with the state of things. And they rightfully blame the establishment for the fact that none of these big systems work for them anymore. So the two main parties have a hard time breaking through now, because people are so disgusted with them that you've got to be an amazing Democrat or an amazing Republican to generate any real excitement. And so people are more and more open to outsiders. And that's Trump. I mean, most people know him as a reality TV show host.
Mm-hmm.
And in Italy, the head of one of the two coalition partners that run the Italian government now, he's a comedian. And like you said, the guy in the Ukraine is a retired comedian who is now, he won in a landslide. He didn't squeak in. He won big.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that we are now open to outsiders with new ideas. And comedians are really good at presenting new ideas in ways that break through the clutter. Their job is to get your attention with things you hadn't thought of before. So that makes them really effective outsider politicians. So there's a big market niche there now. So don't be surprised if a lot of other performers try to jump into it because we are open to what they have to say now. Yeah. Now, the problem is performers tend not to have a lot of experience in governance because those are two completely different fields normally. So when we elect these populists in general and populist performers in particular, chaos usually ensues because they obviously they don't have a coherent political platform. And they also don't have any experience with consensus building, which is what you've got to do to run a government. You're not the dictator. You don't just go in there and say, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this today. That's not how it works. You have to go in there and say, okay, what do I have to give you to get you to do this one thing here? And that's a whole different thing for most people. In most aspects of life, that's not how things work. And therefore, most of us aren't experienced in ways that would make us good leaders the minute we walk through the door. And that's true for all these populists coming in now. They're really good at articulating people's frustrations and validating people's frustrations, but they aren't necessarily any good at running a big system like a government. And that means we're going to have more and more chaotic politics going forward. Wait till we see who takes over in France after Macron is done.
Yeah.
And which he might be soon based on how all this is going. And Angela Merkel is soon to be out of power in Germany. And it's not clear who replaces her, but one of the right-wing parties that until pretty recently was considered a fringe party is gaining ground. And so they might have a coalition that includes people who weren't part of the government until very recently, or are not now part of the government and haven't been part of the government for years and years. And that's going to be interesting because we don't know how it's going to play out. We don't know if Germany becomes a Eurosceptic country. What does that mean? Anyhow, you look at any part of the world and you get questions like that, with the exception of the dictatorships. The Chinese Communist Party is firmly in charge, and Vladimir Putin is firmly in charge in Russia, and they're looking like islands of stability compared to the developed world democracies right now. And that's a really scary situation when you've got the authoritarian governments being able to make quick decisions and the democracies being bogged down in political chaos. That historically that hasn't gone well. And it's something that we appear to be headed for. So politically, this is a really scary time, because financially, it's a really scary time. Those two things are obviously related, and they obviously are part of a feedback loop. And right now, the feedback loop is heading in a negative direction.
Yeah, I agree. And if nothing else, even if they can't do anything, at least they're going to keep you entertained, right? They'll keep the jokes flying and keep things light, and might be going down the tubes, but man, is it going to be fun.
Well, it'll be fun for gold bugs, Gary. But I don't think a lot of other people will get the jokes.
Yeah.
And when they're being laid off and, and their city governments are going bankrupt and their pensions are being cut back to 42% of the original amount, that stuff's not going to be funny no matter how it's couched by the government. And all of that stuff is coming. I mean,
yeah. Well,
you and I have spent whole shows on just the pension crisis.
I'm going to change up a little bit on this because obviously the U.S. will be the last to fall. I think that's a foregone conclusion. All these European countries, there is going to be a flight out of there. As the local population gets more and more disenfranchised, they're going to leave. And whether the U.S. is becoming a totalitarian state or not, it's still the cleanest shirt in the laundry. And we're going to be getting a flood of Europeans here. I mean, it's already starting. I know it's coming. Places like Londistan, there's been thousands of acid attacks. They just throw acid on people. And, the word's going to get out.
Creative, though, Kerry. If you ban guns, they have to find some other weapon. Obviously.
I guess I'd rather be shot than have acid thrown on me, I got to tell you.
Wasn't London thinking about banning
knives,
the purchase of kitchen knives?
Yeah, right.
Department stores. Yeah, okay.
Because they're just, instead of supermarkets with steaks, now they'll just have canned jars of baby food there. So you won't have to cut anything up. You just use a spoon. And older people already have to do that. Babies already do. So for the rest of the population, it's going to be great. It's going to be great for the baby food manufacturers. I guess Gerber. I don't know if there really are any other ones. Nestle, I think, owns Gerber's, if I'm not mistaken. I won't swear to it. It just seems to stick in my mind. So it's going to be great for Nestle, right?
Well, this is one of those aspects of life that operate for governments pretty much the way they operate for individuals. When you make a really bad decision, your life becomes consumed by the consequences of that bad decision, and you start doing things you never would have done before. But in the moment, you've got to take steps to fix the consequences of what you did before. And with governments now, they've all borrowed way too much money. They've all imposed a lot of rules on people that may or may not have seemed reasonable at the time, but don't make any sense anymore. And so much of, for instance, Britain, so much of their life now is dominated by trying to deal with the consequences of past mistakes. Now, Europe is like that big time now because they've created this huge bureaucracy to run these countries that have negative debt trends and negative demographic trends and a complete lack of faith in their culture. So you take those things and put them together, and you end up with all these weird decisions that were made in the past that are now dominating the headlines and dominating the times of the politicians, and not leaving them time to do anything productive. And we've got the same problems in the U.S., but it's less serious here because we haven't gone that far down that road yet. But our debt trends are insanely bad. We're running $1 trillion deficits now, and that will only increase in the next recession or when the next government comes into power and institutes a whole bunch of new spending programs or whatever. So those are things we're going to be dealing with in the future. And our bad pension mistakes, where cities and states are now consumed by trying to pay their pension bills, which they can't pay anymore, at the expense of roads and libraries and schools, et cetera, et cetera. So we are headed for the same problem. But as you said, we're not quite as far down that road. So even trouble in the U.S., paradoxically, might make the dollar go up because trouble here will scare the rest of the world and lead to them buying treasury bonds as a place to hide out, even though the trouble started here. That's how it's worked in the last couple of cycles, where the dollar does well, even when the U.S. is having big problems, just because everybody else's problems are magnified by our problems, and their problems started out as being a lot worse than ours. So very it's true. Completely possible that in the next cycle, we run into huge amounts of trouble here in the U.S., but the dollar goes up because of it, at least temporarily. In the end, variation on Keynes's, in the end, or in the long run, we're all dead. But in the long run, all these fiat currencies are dead. It's just a question of which dies first and how fast they decline. And it's possible that the dollar is one of the last to go, but it's also a lock that the dollar is going. None of these currencies are viable anymore. Mm-hmm. And as we take on more and more debt, that'll become more and more apparent. So that's the big story that's out there, and all the rest of this stuff is sort of the interesting details that are fun to watch and in the headlines along the way. But the big story is the gigantic financial crisis that's out there at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah. In other words, nobody gets out alive.
Yeah. Well,
Jim Morrison
no government-run fiat currency gets out alive. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
gold bugs will get out alive financially, but they're among the minority.
Yeah. Agreed. Hey, well, I think we've done it for today. I think we're about done. So as always, be a part of the show and email us kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook page, Financial Survival Network, but also check out my personal Facebook page where I deal with Florida Man. I'm seriously thinking, John, about starting a Florida Man podcast, because it's like, who was it? Snyder, Michael Snyder, Economic Collapse blog. He came up with a story of the 30 top Florida Man stories, of which I knew most of them, and they were downright hysterical and disturbing. And, because like the headline is Florida Man. I don't know if it's become a meme in the news media itself, or they just do that, because you don't see South Carolina Man, Missouri Man, or Illinois Man. It's always Florida Man. He's always the culprit, and he's caused us so much trouble, but so many comedic and hysterical moments that he's worthy of recognition.
Well, the reason for that, Kerry, is that, it's the same problem that California has, where if life doesn't work out for you in Ohio, you don't just move to Illinois, right? You go someplace sunny and warm where at least you're not cold, and so you end up in Florida or California. So they've got all the homeless people.
Thanks a
and
lot.
You've got all the Florida Man.
Yeah, we've got
low
the
IQ.
I think most of them are. I think most of them are locally bred and probably locally inbred. I think that's probably what's going on here. Something happened, and I'm not sure what in this state. I don't know if it's too much sun and it makes your brain go mush, but something is definitely afoot here, and we're going to look into it, and we're going to come up with answers, John.
All right. There's a very funny TV show called The Good Place, and one of their main characters is from Jacksonville.
Oh, well, of course.
So he is a nonstop Florida man running jokes. They actually we went to a bank once, and the bank said, normally we have a policy of closing the bank the minute a man from Florida walks in.
And for good reason, too, I might add. Yeah. For very good reason. Yeah, you just can't make this stuff up. But, playing with pipe bombs, all right, like I can understand fireworks are legal in the state. Don't ask me why, but they're legal. All right, so responsible fireworks, hopefully not too many people get disfigured. But pipe bombs, that's a whole new level of recklessness that really is almost shocking, Oh, it is shocking. Not almost shocking. It's shocking. So we're going to have to leave it at that. But anyway, John, enjoy the week. This is Monday, after all. Happy Monday to all of you out there. We will be back. I've got a person coming up next who is actually running for president, believe it or not, John. And I'm sure you know him. His name is a household word. His name is Tim Harris. And he's an environmentalist, self-proclaimed next presider of the United States. And I don't know, I'm feeling optimistic.
All right. Well, we need more presidential candidates.
Yeah, we don't have enough.
Encourage him to run, yeah.
All right, John. We'll catch up with you next week. Be well, my friend.
You too. See ya.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.